The Tower of Babel was never just a story about different languages. That explanation is too simple. The real question is this: why would unity suddenly become dangerous? Because according to the story, humanity had become united, speaking one language, moving as one people, building together with one purpose. And then suddenly, that unity had to be broken. And not only physically, but mentally, linguistically, civilizationally. That changes the story completely. Because if the issue is only arrogance, why destroy communication itself? Why fragment humanity's ability to understand one another? Welcome back, Limitless Souls. This is Astro Limitless, where clarity matters more than comfort. The Tower of Babel appears in the book of Genesis after the flood narrative. This matters because humanity is presented as unified again after catastrophe. One language, one movement, and one direction. And then comes one of the most disturbing lines in the entire passage. Nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. Let's think about that carefully. That statement completely changes the atmosphere of the story. Because suddenly, humanity is not being described as weak. Humanity is being described as capable, potentially too capable. And this raises a serious question. What exactly was humanity becoming before fragmentation occurred? Well, most people imagine bricks, architecture, a giant building reaching the sky. But ancient civilizations rarely separated architecture from spirituality, especially in Mesopotamia. The Tower of Babel is widely associated with Babylonian ziggurats. And ziggurats were not ordinary structures. They were ritual centers, cosmic mountains, or sacred ascent structures. The Babylonians believed these structures connected to heaven and earth, and some ancient inscriptions even describe them as bonds between worlds. Biblical narrative frames the tower as dangerous, but Mesopotamian civilization viewed these structures as sacred points of connection. That contradiction should immediately stand out. Ancient Babylon inherited much of its cosmology from the Sumerians, and the Sumerians were obsessed with celestial knowledge, or divine beings descending from heaven, sacred kingship, and cosmic order. To them, temples and ziggurats were not symbolic decoration, but they represented alignment between humanity and the divine realm. So when Genesis describes humanity attempting to build upward, the story may not simply describe physical ambition. It may also describe humanity attempting reconnection. That interpretation becomes even more unsettling when compared to Gnostic thought. Because in many Gnostic systems, humanity is already described as disconnected, or fragmented, or trapped in separation from divine fullness. Now, why language matters more than people realize? Because language is not just communication. Language regionalizes reality. The words available to a civilization determine how people think, how they categorize existence, how knowledge is transmitted, in how collective memory survives. The moment language fractures, shared perception fractures with it. Means Babel was not merely people speaking differently, but it was humanity losing unified understanding. Civilization diverge, myths split apart, symbols mutate, meanings distort over generations. And this may explain why ancient cultures across the world preserve strangely similar stories. The flood myths, the sky gods, the sacred mountains, serpent symbolism, divine beings descending from heaven. It is almost as if fragments of one older framework survived in scattered forms after separation. In Gnostic cosmology, division is not natural. Unity belongs to the pleroma, the realm of divine fullness. Fragmentation belongs to the lower material condition. The material world itself is described as separation from original wholeness. And that makes the Bible story extremely symbolic, because it became divided languages, divided nations, divided understanding. It began resembling imposed fragmentation of consciousness. Throughout history, unified human consciousness has often been treated as dangerous because once people exchange knowledge freely, recognize patterns together, and communicate clearly across divisions, control becomes harder to maintain through confusion. And this appears repeatedly across history. The knowledge becomes hidden, restricted, fragmented, or reserved for select groups. Ancient mystery schools guarded teachings carefully. Religious institutions centralized interpretation. Empires controlled literacy. But why? Because shared understanding creates power. This is one of the most fascinating implications of Babel. What if the story is not only about punishment? What if it is preserving memory of civilizational fragmentation itself? Collective human separation from unified knowledge, unified symbolism, unified cosmology, and over time, language diverged, myths transformed, civilizations isolated, and original meanings become buried beneath layers of reinterpretation. And what survives today may only be fragments, broken pieces of something much older. But the confusion of Babel may not only refer to speech, it may also refer to fragmentation of perception itself. The humanity losing shared understanding sounds strangely familiar today. Modern humanity is technologically connected, yet psychologically divided beyond anything in history. Different realities, different truths, different interpretation of existence itself. There's information everywhere, but understanding nowhere. This leads to the deepest question of all. What if the danger in Babel was never arrogance? What if it's unified humanity recovering shared awareness? Because of course, once humanity remembers together or understands together and reconnects fragmented knowledge, well, something changes. And perhaps that is exactly what the story was warning about. It's not humanity becoming evil, but humanity becoming conscious. One of the strangest things about the Bible story is that the punishment was not destruction. Humanity was not wiped out. The tower was not consumed by fire, but instead, understanding itself was disrupted. And that detail matters. Because if you truly wanted to stop a civilization from advancing collectively, well, the most effective way would not be physical destruction, right? It would be fragmentation, confusion, or collapse of shared meaning. Because once people lose shared understanding, they stop moving as one civilization. They become separate cultures, separate identities, separate realities, and eventually, separate truths. Ancient traditions often use language symbolically because it represented shared consciousness, unified worldview, or collective understanding of reality. So one language may not simply mean identical speech. It may mean humanity perceiving existence through a unified framework. To one symbolic system, one cosmology, one understanding of humanity's place in the universe. And once that framework breaks, civilizations linters psychologically. Now, what is the connection to the fallen world in Gnosticism? There is where the Babel story begins, overlapping deeply with Gnostic cosmology. Because in many Gnostic texts, the material world is already presented as fractured reality. The Gnostics repeatedly describe humanity as existing in forgetfulness or division, or you may say spiritual amnesia. And this condition is not accidental. It's actually structural. Means separation itself becomes part of the system. So when Babel describes humanity becoming divided, scattered, or unable to understand one another, it resembles the exact condition Gnostics believed humanity was trapped inside. Now, why the story appears after the flood? Because civilizations separated by enormous distances preserved remarkably similar memories of catastrophic reset. Then after the flood in Genesis, humanity reunifies. And immediately, fragmentation occurs again, almost as if the story is describing cycles. Cycles of destruction, rebuilding, reunification, and then fragmentation, all over again. What if ancient civilization were not primitive beginnings of knowledge, but fragmented remnants of older knowledge system? Because the deeper archaeologists and historians study ancient cultures, the stranger the parallels become. The sacred geometry, astronomical precision, flood myths, divine intermediaries, serpent symbolism, cosmic trees, sacred mountains. These themes appear globally, and Babel is symbolically explain why. It's not because civilizations copied each other directly, but it's because fragments survived after separations. Ancient civilizations often restricted sacred knowledge. Of course, not everyone had access. Mystery schools existed in Egypt, Greece, Babylon, early esoteric traditions. Knowledge was layered. Public teachings for the masses, deeper teaching for initiates. Why? The Gnostic knowledge was gnosis, to transform consciousness itself. And that is exactly what Babel protects, unified access to understanding. Confusion is one of the most powerful forms of control, because confused people become reactive or lose direction and struggle to organize collectively. And modern civilization operates heavily through information overload, contradiction, division, endless competing narratives. Humanity now possesses more information than ever before, yet people remain divided or disoriented or psychologically fragmented. And that sounds eerily similar to Babel. Now, Babylon later becomes symbolic in many traditions, not merely just as a city, but as a corrupted civilization. In esoteric interpretation, Babylon often represents confusion, or illusion, or spiritual distortion, or separation from higher truth, which makes the Babel story even more symbolic. Because Babel is traditionally associated with Babylon itself, meaning the city becomes linked to fragmentation of humanity. And many ancient cultures believe in the concept of a world axis, a connection point between heaven, earth, and the divine realm. This appears globally, and the tower may represent exactly this. Most people think ancient stories are irrelevant, but Babel feels more relevant now than ever, because humanity is globally connected, yet still divided. People no longer share common meaning, common truth, or common symbolic understanding. Everyone lives inside separate realities constructed through media, ideology, algorithms, or identity systems. Modern civilization may actually represent Babel completed. And this brings us back to the original question. Why was unity dangerous? Because the text itself gives the answer. Nothing they plan to do will be impossible for them. When a time when humanity was more unified, connected, and perhaps closer to knowledge that later becomes scattered across civilization. And if that is true, then humanity may still be living inside the consequences of Babel today. The real question is not why did the tower fall? The real question is what happens if humanity ever remembers how to understand itself again? This is Astro Limitless, and here we don't follow what we're told, we understand it.